Good afternoon, everybody. I'm the 100 Proof News Hound, here with another edition of the 100 Years and More show. This particular episode arose out of an interest I had to see what was America doing in the summer of 1876. That's that summer where Custer was annihilated at the Battle of the Little Bighorn. What else was going on in the country? Because that battle and that result was a pretty extreme event in the history of America. What were people doing? What were people thinking about? So I started looking through different newspapers to get some information for an episode with respect to that. When I ran into the June 11th, 1876 edition of the St. Louis Globe-Democrat. That's a newspaper that doesn't exist anymore. And going through the newspaper, I was struck by what was on just two pages, pages 6 and pages 7. Now it was a Sunday edition, these are kind of double wide pages, but still it's pages 6 and pages 7. And when I went through those 2 pages in detail, I realized that I'd probably learned more about life in middle America in the 1870s than I had reading a score of books on the subject, and watching untold numbers of documentaries over my life about life in America in that time period. It really brought to home how varied and how interesting and how dangerous life was in America at that time. So let's go through, and we're going to start at page 6. This first story it appeared next to the next story, and the juxtaposition couldn't be more stark. But here we are. We're going to start. Our first story is about a woman named Annie Louise Cary. Now, who's Annie Louise Cary? Well, she's a singer, and she's born in Maine in 1841. She studied in Milan and became a noted contralto. A contralto is a lower register female voice, not a baritone, but think in terms of Carly Simon or Karen Carpenter. It's that kind of range. So it's not a tenor, not a high pitched voice, a low resonant sort of voice. So what's Annie Louise Cary got to do with St. Louis? Well, here's the headline. Annie Louise Cary, her appearance on Tuesday next are brilliant close to the music season. Well, here we are in St. Louis, Missouri in June, and we've got a close to the music season, which implies that there is in fact a music season, just like there would be in Boston or Philadelphia or New York. The music season running from the fall through the winter into the early spring. Well, St. Louis, you might not think St. Louis would have the population to support a music season, but at that time, St. Louis punched above its weight in that, well, it was in fact the 4th largest city in America at that time. And I'm pretty sure you can name the other 3 being, of course, New York, Philadelphia, and Chicago. So it's the 4th largest city. It's got a population of almost 350,000 people. It's a big city. It's a young city. We'll get into that as well. Demographically, it skews very young. So there's enough people there to support a music season, an opera house, and the whole 9 yards. So here's what they have to say: that Anna Louise Cary is the best of all living contralto singers, there can be no doubt. For Belli Bettini, her only rival upon the lyric stage, while a consummate artist and finished vocalist, is inferior in quality of tone, power of voice, and sympathetic expression to our diva. We say our diva, for Miss Cary is a New England girl. All of her musical training was gained at home. We know that's not true, but she was from Maine. Interesting to note. They're commenting on the quality of her voice, and what you have to realize back here in 1871 is nobody would have heard her sing. She's got this reputation that the only way to actually hear her singing is to actually attend one of her live performances. There's no phonographs. There's no other recording mechanism. So unless you're one of the 1,500 people that are going to show up to her performance, you will have no idea what she really sounds like. You're relying on reviewers like this gentleman to tell you that. So you got to buy your ticket and go see Annie if you want to see how good a singer she actually is. They go on. Miss Cary, who has recently returned from Europe for a short stay, will appear in concert at Mercantile Library Hall. And we have a picture of that on Tuesday evening next, under the auspices of the Euphonian Club. Clubs were a big deal back then. Men's clubs, women's clubs, religious orders, clubs of all nature were a popular way to spend your time. Her well-known popularity will ensure a fashionable attendance, and her artistic merit will draw all lovers of vocal art to listen once more to an organ of exquisite beauty. Well, they're certainly painting a pretty picture here. Now, they go on. During her stay, she will sing in a few cities only, and the Amphion Club deserves the thanks of St. Louisians for their enterprise in making arrangements to produce her so late in the season. All right. They give the program what song she'll be singing. And it is notable that they weren't lying. She had just returned from Europe. She would go on to tour Russia in 1875 through 1877, and she would die in 1921 as quite a wealthy woman. She'd leave a $50,000 donation to the People's Symphony Orchestra, which is the equivalent of about $1.5 million today, and she made various other charitable donations upon her death. So she had a successful career. She was recognized as a contralto of some extreme quality, and she's performing in St. Louis in June of 1876. Now, the absolute next article in the St. Louis Globe-Democrat is as follows. A miner returns from the Black Hills with 2 bullets in his body. That's the headline. Got opera singing. We got people getting shot in the Black Hills. What's this all about? Mr. Charles Rombauer, a geologist and a scientific miner, left his native land, which was Germany, about 8 months ago and came to America with the expectations of making an everlasting fortune in the Black Hills. He's going up and he's going to try to mine in the Black Hills. This is what the whole Custer thing is all about. That land is reserved for Native Americans, but it has gold in it, and the miners are going up there trying to find it, and they're getting into altercations with the Native Americans, and all hell's breaking loose, and it culminates in the battle and massacre that you're going to see a month after this. It's noted on the 3rd of March last, he left Omaha for the glorious Black Hills, accompanied by 18 Germans, 2 Swedes, 6 Italians, and 4 Americans. He carried all of his provisions, tools, etc. on pack mules and horses. So he's got this international expedition of, well, just think about it. It's hard enough to mine. Have you ever watched any of those mining shows? Have you ever gone on a YouTube thing and watched a guy actually gold mine? It's hard freaking work. And it's hard enough work now in the 21st century where you've got all basically the comforts of home at base camp. You're going out here with mules into an area where nobody wants you to be there, where there are hostile Native Americans, and you're going to try to, on top of all that, do some mining? Okay. Things didn't go as he expected. Here's what happened. Provisions became scarce, but little could be obtained within a reasonable distance, and the party had to subsist principally upon roots and such game as they could find. But the worst enemy they had to encounter were the Native Americans, who dogged their steps wherever they went and attacked their camp nearly every night. What would happen is that commencing around 3 o'clock in the morning every night, the Sioux, which were the tribe that they were dealing with here, would send in warriors to infiltrate the camp and basically try to kill as many as they could because they're not supposed to be there. And that went on constantly. Said they would crawl into the camp, shoot the sleeping gold seekers at short range. Yet they didn't give up. They kept trying to mine gold. 8 weeks ago, Mr. Rombauer was wounded the first time, and 3 weeks ago at Blue Mountain, he was shot in the leg while sleeping. Now they're going to state the obvious. Searching for gold under such circumstances proved to be an uphill business. It was necessary to put 20 men on guard to keep the natives from murdering the working party of 8. So the 8 guys were actually working. The rest of this crew were just security. Nearly every day, 1 or more of the miners would be killed. Of the party of 30 who went out with Mr. Rombauer, 17 were killed. It's fearlessness bordering on lunacy. They were threatened with extermination and being out of provisions were compelled to abandon their enterprise and turn their backs upon the Black Hills. It's interesting that Mr. Rombauer in the article didn't blame the Native Americans. He admitted that they were where they shouldn't be. He only lamented that the soldiers, the American military, which had a presence in the area, didn't protect them. But then he also rationalized that in that we were not supposed to be there anyways. But they went in, 17 out of 30 are killed. They come back, and the article concludes that he's going to be back again next year. Try it again. So there we are. We've got opera singers and running gun battles happening on the same page in the same newspaper at the same time. Now, page 7 is an early attempt at a sports section in a newspaper. It's not labeled as such, but here's the headlines. Here's what they say. The headline of the overall page says, "Won and lost. The St. Louis Brown Stockings again defeated. They are outfielded and outbatted by the Hartfords." 1876, by coincidence, was the first year of the National League. The teams that formed the league in that first year were the Chicago White Stockings, the Hartford Dark Blues, and you can still get their jerseys online. They're pretty cool. They have the St. Louis Brown Stockings, the Boston Red Stockings. You're getting a picture of what they name their teams after. The Louisville Grays, the New York Mutuals, which sounds like a life insurance company. The Philadelphia Athletics. which are still in existence. It is the Oakland Athletics, now going to Vegas, and the Cincinnati Reds. It's noted here that for the third successive time, the Hartfords have scored a victory over the St. Louis club, the Browns. The attendance, and they make a comment, the attendance was no better than in the other two games. So the St. Louis is, they got a good team that year, and they'd end up finishing, I believe, second. They were having a hard time drawing people to the old ballpark. The sports section, it was something they would never do now. Following that is an entire column of the play-by-play of every at-bat, every out, every run of the game. And so that's in there. So if you missed, you could pick up the not just the gist of it, you can pick up the entirety of it in your current edition of the St. Louis Globe-Democrat. Then they've got the box scores for the local teams. There's local leagues, and that's all carried extensively by the newspaper. And then you've got a column where you've got sort of a guru, a swami. What he is a guy with a lot of inside knowledge on baseball, and he talks baseball. And his column is called "The Inquirer Shrieks," and has paragraphs such as, "And Chicago came within one out of stepping on its ear yesterday. The Louisvilles have been strengthened, as it were, by the breeze from Plymouth Rock." What that meant is that Plymouth team is really lousy, and they're coming into play, and so they expect to get some wins out of them. They cover them. They cover the local. They tell you what's going to happen in the week ahead. It says here the Etnas and the Haymakers will play tomorrow at the foot of Anna Street. And it also comments that a picked nine of Californians will shortly visit the East, leaving from San Francisco on the 16th. So there's some barnstorming California baseball players are going to roll into town. And then here's something really unique that you probably wouldn't have expected in 1876 in St. Louis, Missouri. Now remember, Missouri was originally was a slave state. It was a border state during the Civil War. Passions rode pretty high on both sides of the arguments here. But they have black baseball in St. Louis in 1876. It says here, "The Colored Uniques of Chicago play at Grand Avenue Park on Tuesday and Thursday of this week. They will have as opponents the St. Louis Blue Stockings, and each nine is composed of skillful players. Warm work may be anticipated." Now, what's interesting is they'll be playing at the same park that the St. Louis Browns, the Major League team, plays at. So the black team from Chicago is coming down, going to play the local team, and they're going to play in the Major League ballpark. You probably wouldn't have expected that level of interracial cooperation in Missouri in 1876, but there it was. They give a complete analysis of, it's way more in-depth baseball coverage than even they have today, because they give a complete analysis of the pennant race, which teams are on a hot streak, which teams are on a cold streak, and devote basically about 4 full columns to what's going on in baseball, in not just in the area, but nationally. Then we get to a different sport. Headline, pigeon shooting. And we're not talking about clay pigeons. We're talking about shooting real pigeons. And here's the article. "A large crowd was in attendance at Wrinkles Grove yesterday morning to witness the return match between members of the Quincy Shooting Club and the St. Louis Gun Club. 10 men aside participated." And then it's got like a box score of how many pigeons they shot over the course of the event. And most of the guys were shooting anywhere between 8 and 14 pigeons. It turns out that the Quincy team shot 122 pigeons, and they beat the St. Louis team, who shot 117. But that means they shot, and of course they killed, 239 pigeons in the course of this match. Did a little research, and it turns out there are still a couple of clubs, kind of underground, but there's still a couple of clubs in America where they shoot live pigeons instead of clay pigeons. I've never seen it covered either on YouTube, television, or anywhere else, and I imagine that the reason is that it just doesn't jibe very well with our modern sensibilities. But here's it. They concluded at the end of killing all the pigeons, it's noted that in the evening, the Quincy gentlemen were entertained by their St. Louis friends at Barnum's. Now, what's Barnum's? It's not a circus. Barnum's was the best hotel in town in St. Louis in 1876. It was a 6-story hotel, and I think we're going to get a picture of it here. 6-story hotel that lasted until 1890, when it was torn down at that time. And it was known, the Barnum's Hotel was known as, it was the last place that Dred Scott, that Dred Scott worked. He worked as a porter there from the time he was freed the time he was freed until his death. Dred Scott, of course, is worthy of more than one future episode. But just as an aside, he was a porter at Barnum's Hotel in St. Louis up until his death. Now, another big activity that they enjoyed was billiards. We've seen that in some of the other episodes at hotels with billiard rooms and that. But this is interesting. It looks like that there was a tournament in New York where some of the billiard players were in cahoots with gamblers and through their matches. And the headline here is Crooked Cuis, and it's talking about a tournament that's coming up this week in St. Louis. Public curiosity has been somewhat piqued to account for the conspicuous absence of several well-known experts from the Centennial Billiard Tournament that was opened in Irving Hall last night. The entries for the prize aggregated at $1,500. So that's about a $45,000, $50,000 prize. There's only four. One of them being Mr. Sexton. The reason Mr. Sexton is important is he won that tournament in New York that was rigged, but no one's suspecting him. What they say is the managers say that the other players who did not enter, they did not enter because they were not asked to do so. They allege that many of the games at the late tournament were played for the pool box. Now, these are terms of art that we'll have to work our way through. For the pool box in the interest of gamblers. So, anyways, the gist of it is that they were rigging the matches, and so that only four guys showed up. They only deemed four guys to be clean and allowed them to participate in the tournament going on in St. Louis that week. And they note that only those to whom no such suspicion was attached, therefore, were asked to participate in the forthcoming contest. So that's one thing you're going to see through sports throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It's sports and gambling goes together. It still does, but sports and rigging the events went hand in hand, and it was a constant battle between the leagues and the gamblers. Now, newspapers at that time, all the news that's fit to print, but newspapers at that time, they've got to fill every inch of column space, and sometimes it doesn't jive out. It doesn't. There's 99% fill of the page is filled, but there's little areas that need to be filled, and so they'll have articles of interest and sometimes articles of no interest just to fill the space. And here's what we got. Here's what we have here, under the heading "A Fearful Fall." St. Joseph, Missouri, June 10th. John McKnight, a lawyer of Oregon Holt County, Missouri, fell from the window of his room on the third story of the Occidental Hotel at 2 o'clock this morning. Wish we had film of that bit of lunacy. And was badly injured. He is as yet unable to talk sufficiently well to give any account of the mind reels at the possibilities. Everything from bad gambling debts to women of the night. But anyway, somehow he ended up flying out his window on the third floor and banging off the pavement. Now here is something you wouldn't expect. I bet nobody out there was expecting this. An entire column about chess. St. Louis is and always has been a big chess town. It's hosted world championships, and presently the World Chess Hall of Fame is located in St. Louis, Missouri. But here we have a whole section on chess. What they have here, they have the chess problems. They post chess problems, and then people will write in with their answers to see if they can find the solutions. They also ask for potential problems from their readership. And this is an interesting thing. You're supposed to write in with your own original chess problem, but apparently somebody wrote in with a chess problem that was taken out of a popular chess book of the day. And here's what they had to say. A correspondent sends us a two-move problem taken from Agnell, page 174, adding some useless black pieces to cover his deception. We feel like using much more forcible than elegant with respect to this problem. In short, don't try that trick again. That's all. Anyway, so they got the editor of the chess section, the chess page, got a little offended that somebody would try to slide by a well-known chess problem from a well-known chess book and pass it off as his own. But they report on chess games happening throughout the Midwest. They report on good players playing by mail and how the progress of those games are. It's really an extensive chess section here. Now, this next section that was here on page 7 deals with, well, it will give you more information than I think you've ever had with respect to life and death in middle America in the mid-19th century here. It's the city mortality list, record of deaths and diseases for the past week. The following is the official mortality report of St. Louis for the week ending Saturday, June 10th. Interesting. They break it down by age, how they died. And you know how in the modern world, if you break mortality down by age for any specific time, it's going to be an inverted pyramid. Very few young people die. As you go older and you work your way through the decades, more and more people die, with the largest number of deaths in a modern society occurring between the ages of 70 and 100. Exactly the opposite here going on in St. Louis in 1876. There were a total of 144 deaths in St. Louis that week. 85 of those deaths were under 5 years of age. And as far as from 70 to 100, a total of 3. Only 2 people died between the ages of 70 and 80, and only 1 person died over the age of 80. Everyone is dying. The next highest number is from 30 to 40. And that's where the bulk of the population probably is, in that sweet spot of 30 to 40. So they're dying, but infant mortality is through the roof. That's why today in a modern society with antibiotics and medical systems that we all have, you need a reproductive rate of about 2.1 per female to keep your population even. At this point in time, looked it up, it's about 4.5. In order to keep your population at an even keel, every woman has to be having about 4.5 children, because you're just going to lose so many along the way. So I guess you got to look at it this way. They're in a city, St. Louis had 350,000 people in 1876. They're having 2.5 times as many. Well, we don't get 2.1 births anymore. It's more like 1.6, 1.7. You're getting probably 3 times as many births per person in 1876 as you are right now. That many people, you've got to run that many people through the system in order to maintain your population, 350,000. So people are coming in 2 or 3 times as many, and people are going out 2 or 3 times as many to keep the population steady. If you're going to have an increase in population separate and apart from immigration, you're going to have to end up with birth rates of over 5, which does occur. But the 4.5 is what's necessary just to keep your population even. Now, what were people dying of? People today don't die of acute diseases on the whole. People today tend to die on conditions. They die of heart disease, they die of cancer, they die of senile dementia, Alzheimer's. These are if they're chronic conditions that develop over time, causing death usually in your 70s and 80s. Back then, people were dying of stuff, acute bacteriological or viral infections for the most part. And I've got the tables here. We're going to go through this because I think it's worthwhile. 1 person that week died of measles. 2 people died of scarlet fever. 3 people died of smallpox, doesn't occur anymore. People died of diphtheria, which is a bacterial infection. Whooping cough, which is the pertussis bacteria. Erysipelas, which is a cellulitis of the skin, a bacterial infection that you would treat today with a cream. That killed somebody. Someone died of typhoid. They died of pernicious fever. They died of nervous, which I looked up, and it resulted from a depressed spirit. Who knows? It doesn't exist. That's just a label. 2 people died of diarrhea. Died of diarrhea. The highest cause of death for any particular disease was infantile cholera. 13 children died of cholera that week in St. Louis. People died of cerebral and spinal meningitis. People died of just regular meningitis, which is inflammation of the brain and spinal column. 1 person died of inanition, which is starvation. Well, that'll kill you, I guess. Only 3 people died of cancer. 1, they said, a generic cancer, 1 cancer of the liver, and 1 cancer of the uterus. 8 people died of marasmus. Now, we have 1 person dying of malnutrition, and marasmus we had 1 person dying of starvation. This is malnutrition, which leads to organ failure. 8 people died of that. 1 person died of scrofula. You know what scrofula is? Do you know the king's evil? Throughout the Middle Ages, and actually right up to about 1700, people would line up and let the king of whatever country you are touch you on the head. It was supposed to cure you of this scrofula infection. 1 person died of that. 9 people died of phthisisis. It's phthis. That's tuberculosis. So 9 people died of tuberculosis, or consumption as they called it then. 4 people died of hydrocephalus, which is fluid on the brain. 1 person died of softening of the brain. Now, softening of the brain sounds like it's a made-up thing, but it's not. If you've had a stroke or if you've had an infection, anything that reduces blood supply to the brain and causing some of the tissue to die will leave what looks like a soft spot on autopsy. So they refer to it as softening of the brain. 9 children died of infantile convulsions. That sounds like a symptom rather than a disease. But 9 people, it's hard to get through childhood. 2 people died of tetanus. Now, tetanus or lockjaw. Now, remember that they always tell you to get that tetanus shot? Well, that's why. Back then, people died of it. 2 people died that week. 1 person died of congestion of the brain, which is unusual pressure on the brain. 2 people died of a disease that you might see now, valvular diseases of the heart. 1 person died of a blood clot. 1 person died of a disease of the aorta. 9 people died from pneumatitis, which is inflammation of the lung tissue without infection, and 9 people also died of pleuritis, which is inflammation of the chest wall membrane. 2 people died of bronchitis. Now, we'll just go through the rest of them here as they are interesting. We'll go through. 2 people died of coughing up blood, 1 of edema of the lungs. People died of gastritis, enteritis, peritonitis. 1 person died of dentition. Their teeth were so bad they died. Congestion of the bowels, which is a blockage, which probably would be a horrible way to go. We have kidney failure, cystitis, collapsed lungs. We've got a person dying from premature birth, and I don't know whether that's the baby or the mother. An abortion accident, same thing. Don't know whether it's the baby or the mother dying. Only 2 people out of 144 died of senile dementia. So there's only 2 Alzheimer's. You go read your local obituaries and see how many people are dying of Alzheimer's at the present time. There was an abortion accident. There was injury by violence. Not just saying that's the cause, injury by violence, without specifying what type. 2 fractured skulls. A grotesque one, premature birth by violence. 1 person died of a pistol shot. 1 person of a stab wound. 2 people were run over by railroad cars. 1 person died of asphyxia. 4 people drowned. And my favorite, 1 person died from a brick falling on their head. 1 person died of a concussion of the brain, separate and apart from a brick falling on his head. 4 people died of exposure. I don't know how you die of exposure in June in St. Louis, Missouri, but they did. Then we get in some oddball ones here. Suffocating in a privy. Don't even want to know how that happened. Another person was found buried in a cellar. Again, doesn't sound like a disease, sounds kind of like a symptom. And we had suicide by chloroform, suicide by cutting the throat, and 1 with cause not ascertained. Well, as I said, got a litany of causes of death there. Almost none of those would result in death today. And the things that do cause death today in large numbers are totally absent or almost totally absent from the death rolls in 1876 because people just didn't live long enough to contract the kind of lifestyle diseases that end up ending most of our lives here. Now, one of the things here that you find, do you remember the movie I Cover the Waterfront? It's like a 1934 thing, some a murder mystery down here. There's some action down on the waterfront, and the newspaper guys covering it. Well, they did cover the waterfront a lot back in the 1870s because along with railroads, the river system was the primary mover of people, especially mover of goods. It's always been cheaper to ship things by water than any other way. And St. Louis being a transshipment point where railroads are going to meet with the river navigation system, what was going on in the docks was very important. You actually had a gossip column down here called deck sweepings, where they report on what the scuttlebutt is down at the dock, such as rumors pretty well authenticated were whispered around yesterday afternoon that a towboat with a fleet of barges would be on berth tomorrow for New Orleans and would take freight for that and all points in between. So they're covering everything that's happening on the Mississippi, the Missouri, the Ohio, and all the way up to Chicago. And they quote the rates of shipping. They've got the ads for the different carriers. And what they also have, they report on the heights of the river at all the different ports. I guess it's very. You got to know before you ship your goods. It's to your advantage to know whether you're going to have enough clearance at the different stops downriver, whether your goods are going to get there and how long it's going to take. And what they've got here, they keep notes of every boat and barge on all the major rivers. It would have been possible for a nerd at that time, and I'm sure there were, if he had put a map out in front of him or drawn a nice one, to actually plot the course of every boat, every barge, every commercial steamboat that's operating in America at that time, and you would have been able to follow the travels of each of these boats and barges up and down the Mississippi with exquisite detail because it was important to the transshipment of goods at that time. Now, they have the normal legal, their advertising auctions and things that you would have here. But what they conclude with on page 7 is something that you wouldn't have today. It's a whole section on patent medicines, but very specific kinds of patent medicines. You know, in the movies, they're always talking about getting your blood test before you get married. Well, for the most part, they're checking for sexually transmitted diseases. They're checking mostly for gonorrhea. And at the back of page 7 are a series of ads. There have to be 12 of them. Dr. Butts, Dr. Bonahan, Dr. Hunter. They're all advertising treatments for gonorrhea under the great euphemisms. Like one is advertised under a marriage guide. One, Dr. Bohannon, he's got an interesting thing. He advertises a vegetable curative, permanently cures all form of spermatorrhea or seminal weakness in from 2 to 7 weeks' time. It restores the youthful vigor of those who have destroyed it by excessive or evil practices. And then he tells you how you can obtain it. And then under the heading of a sure thing, Dr. Hunter's specific and injection, number 1, are warranted to cure gonorrhea, GLEAT, Cordy, strictures, diseases of the kidneys, bladder and urinary organs of males and females. And another one quotes, for the speedy cure of seminal weakness, lost manhood, and all disorders brought on by indiscretions or excess. So there's a little bit of moral blame that's attached to these diseases, but they're giving you the way out through these treatments. And looked it up, and some of the treatments are actually potentially effective. But for the desperate man who wants to get married and can't pass his blood test, they're absolutely necessary. Now we come to that portion of the presentation where I recommend an appropriate drink for the material that we've just covered. Since we're dealing with St. Louis, Missouri on the Mississippi River in the height of summer, I thought a mint julep would be nice, but a mint julep is more of a Kentucky drink. So let's do a variation of that, the cherry julep. You're going to start with 7 or 8 mint leaves, half a teaspoon of sugar, 2 ounces of bourbon, a half an ounce of Luxardo cherry liqueur, should be able to obtain that, and maraschino cherries. If you can get bourbon-infused ones, all the better. Get yourself a julep glass, go online, see what it looks like. It's about that big, round. You'll see it. Put the mint sprigs in the bottom of that, mix it with the sugar, and muddle it. Muddle it thoroughly to release all the juices of the mint. Then you fill the glass with ice, you add the bourbon and the Luxardo, you stir. Let it sit there for a minute or so to chill properly, and then you garnish it with a couple of additional mint leaves and add the maraschino cherries. You will find this to be exceedingly refreshing, and for somebody who doesn't like just straight up mint, this is actually an interesting variation on the old mint julep. So there we are. We've got our information. We got our drink. We're off and going. Like and subscribe, and Olivia, if you can you play us out with an appropriate tune? Okay, we'll see you next time down the road here at the 100 Years and More show. All right, take care, everybody.